Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a very dark collection of night shift stories indeed. I'm fortunate enough to be joined by fellow horror creator Deadly Cure. You'll find a link to his channel in the description and at the end of the video. Be sure to check him out when we're done. He is brilliant and I love his work. I'm sure you will too. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I used to bartend, and one of my Friday night duties was closing down the restaurant and counting the money, which meant I was often left alone in the building. I would usually turn off half the light and leave enough on so that I could see. On this particular night I did the usual closing stuff and was walking through the kitchen to the office where I would count the money. Right by the office there is a door that leads to the dining area, when out of the corner of my eye I swear I saw an older man sitting in a section of the restaurant that we referred to as the 20s. When I looked, there wasn't anything there. I wasn't scared, but I went about my business. I opened the restaurant the next morning, and the server working with me had worked at the restaurant on and off for a long time. I was talking to her and said, "Yeah, the strangest thing happened last night. No one was in the restaurant, but then I thought I saw someone." And without skipping a beat, she says, "Oh yeah, the man in the 20 section. He likes hanging out there." The fact she knew it was an old man in the section of the restaurant without me giving specifics sent chills like you can't imagine down my spine.
So for some background info, this is in the UK. I was 24 at the time, and I'm a large-framed woman, like 6 foot tall, nicknamed Amazonian. Anyway, I worked on a farm, or ranch if you prefer, and this establishment breeds horses for shows and races, really professional place. So I was a horse hand normally, clean the stables, feed horses, water them and move them from paddock to stable, or vice versa, and of course collect horse semen when we needed it for AI. So anyway, I was working a night shift, and my co-worker called in sick that night. No big deal. Someone stayed late to help move the horses in the stables and put water down, and I did my hay nets. So I was sorting out the stallions. My co-worker went home, as there were only the males left to sort, and I was doing that. I locked each stable door, top and bottom as usual, while checking everything over, making sure everyone had hay and water, when I heard a commotion from the mare's stables. I stopped what I was doing and rushed over to them, and the mare was screaming. Not uncommon for these warm-blooded animals to be drama queens, but this was something else. I got my ass over there pronto, unlocked the main stable door and rushed over to the screaming mare's stall, unlocked the top door and just leapt in to see the thoroughbred mare bleeding and still making a huge commotion. Now, I should note that the stables are solid stone structures. Only the doors are wood, and even then, they're solid with horseproof locks, since some of them figured out the old locks. So this structure is huge. Stone floor, walls and solid roof, heaters for the winter, and we plug in fans for the summer, but the building is normally cool. We have a sink there and a huge whiteboard saying which horses are on what meds, etc. All the stables are like that. Anyway, I nearly got kicked, but I managed to calm her down and check her over. Now, again, I live in the UK, so no large predators live here, and the stable was completely locked, both top and bottom doors on her stall. I checked her stall over and saw no way of getting in or out. The mare had a huge gash on her leg and rump. Once I flushed the wounds, I got a good look at them. I kid you not, one looked like a bite from a large animal, but around the teeth marks or puncture wound, the flesh was burnt. She had a huge slash on her rump, like a cat scratch but larger. The paws would have had to been bigger than my own hands. It went deep in, so I decided to move her out of there and outside my office, which was a porcelain cabin-like building, similar to a trailer. I don't know if you guys knew this, but horses bleed out like a bitch. She had absorbent dressings on, and it was saturated in seconds. I was covered in blood myself. I called the vet, and they said they would arrive ASAP, so I checked on the mare from my window. She was standing where I tied her. I then went to check on the security footage. So many cameras all over the place, something should be seen. So on the camera, I rewound back to 2 AM. Nothing. The guard dogs were in their area by the gates, lying down, all accounted for. We have large livestock guardians. 3:07 to 3:12. They suddenly get up and start going crazy, barking in all directions, but never leaving the area. At one point, they all huddled by their kennels. I checked another camera. 2 AM, cattle are munching and doing their thing in the barn. The barn door is open to the paddock for them to graze, but they seem to be happy and content in the barn. 3:07 to 3:11. The cattle started huddling in a circle, looking spooked, and then stampeded to the corner of the barn. 0200. I looked at the mare's stables on the camera. Nothing on the outside of the building. All calm and quiet. Crickets doing their thing. Then about 3:07, there was silence. I thought the camera had cut out sound, which was weird as all cameras have sound and all worked fine. I look inside the stables with the camera, and the hay seems to be moving on the ground at 3:07, just stragglers that come from the stables, so I thought it was draft. 3:09, then the mare screamed, meaning the sound was indeed working. I looked at the individual stall cameras. We use them when they're giving birth or heavily pregnant, and the mare that was attacked starts bucking and going insane on the 3:09 mark. The only thing the camera showed was 2 glowing eyes. No body with it, just the eyes like a reflection. Then shortly after, I saw myself go in and try to calm the mare. The hair stood up on the back of my neck when I saw the eyes, and a puff of condensation, like when you breathe out on a cold day, that was right behind me. I was oblivious to it. The mare was still making a fuss, and then she finally stopped. I checked out the timestamp on all of the videos, and all the weirdness happened around the same time. I still had a 5-hour night shift ahead. The vet came, and the horse was treated. The vet was just as spooked as me and noped out of there. I made a call and was allowed to take one of our patrol dogs and have it with me for the night. The dog was a Malinois that had been fully trained in protection work. By the way, the guard dogs by the gate trained for guardian purposes, which also comes naturally. Well, these guys were terrified when I approached. Note that the guard dogs are all used to the workers and are not a threat to us. Ended up having a kangal in my office that night too, because, well, I was scared. Relieved when the next person came in with me, I showed them footage, and they were as spooked as me. The mare had to be euthanized. She was not recovering well. She went into septic shock, despite the treatment she received. It never happened again when I worked nights, but a similar thing happened to a co-worker. This time, it was one of the guard dogs that got hurt and died to their wounds. Sadly, the owners couldn't find what happened still, and it was a case of hiring armed security, but nothing happened again. I quit my job a few months after Incident 1. I couldn't tell you if it happened again, but I don't want to know.
I used to work private security at a shopping mall. My partner and I had already had a feeling this place was haunted. One reason being the homicide that happened right before I was hired made it so inclined. The very west of the mall made the hair on my neck stand on end the most, and I don't know why. It's also very good to note there is minimal shelter at this end of the mall. You can see the cats and dogs walking through the windows at night, and they would bark and whine a lot. One night, I was walking to that end of the mall, and I started to feel like something was following me or walking behind me. When I got to the shelter, none of the animals were making a noise, but I swear to God all of them were awake and staring at or behind me. I got really bad goosebumps and a horrible feeling once in my gut. I put my head down and walked out as fast as possible and closed the door. Once outside, all the negative feelings just went away.
When I was 18, I worked at my college's residence building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half of the 3rd floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with a hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all of the doors were powered by 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m. and said he left his keycard in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary keycard and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key for his room and asked if he was a student or a hotel guest. He replied student. At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easily at this job, but quickly learned not to. Later on in the night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again, and he said no, the door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I'd have to change the batteries, and I went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name, and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the door manually with a master key and told him I'd have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, no, it's okay, I'll close it, and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, so some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe it was just a language barrier issue. At this point though, I really felt something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he tried to entice me to go further into his room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to look at it, and that there was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, I have a key, go get it, and threw it under the bed. He said there was a leak under the fridge. He just kept trying to get me to go down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no. I'd send maintenance up in the morning to take a look if anything was broken. I had my back to him, and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said no, I need them to see. His tone of voice changed, and in the most steady, chilling manner, he said, Ella, it's okay, you can take them off. And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away, trying to retain composure, and said, no thanks, I need to keep them on. Even though he was creeping the hell out of me, I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get into trouble if he complained about me, or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped towards the door to close it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with his little wispy hairs at the top of his forehead and trying to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focused on getting the hell out of there. He once again tried getting me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the doorframe to see if I could spot any actual problems with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets on the bed, nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking he had just arrived today and hadn't gotten a chance to buy anything yet, but in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed, and quickly gathered my door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed, you need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew he wasn't a resident. He tore the corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried convincing them he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which had decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. Obviously he didn't. That's why I called you guys crying and terrified. He kept interjecting to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for his student card, and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove that he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by, as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said across the street. One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street, and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months later, and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked him what his purpose was to be sneaking into a room, he just kept using the ums and ahs and saying he didn't know. They'd ask, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anybody who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know. No reason. I was just here." At one point, he tried to tell them he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still very unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out the room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, the housekeeper came to the desk and told me they found the door deadbolted open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found it. I never saw him again, and to this day, I have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter, and overnight shifts still give me the heebie-jeebies.
I work in a building that's fairly old and has had at least 2 people die on the grounds, one violently. All of the staff have seen or heard some very weird stuff. The first ghostly incident I experienced was when I was sitting down waiting for the bartender to finish closing out so that we could go home. The bar had a bunch of copper Moscow Mule mugs hanging the top of it on nails, which were never actually used. I was just sort of staring into space when I saw a very, very pale and very large hand reach down from the ceiling onto the outside of the bar, reach over and flick one of the cups so it started swinging wildly. The second thing I saw was also in the bar area. We have a little stockroom set behind the bar where the bar staff put their purses, so it's pretty normal to have a member of staff back there looking at their phone. It was late in the evening and there was only me and the bartender, and I was looking for her. I glanced over to the stockroom and really clearly saw the dark shape of a person leaning over the counter, which I assumed was the bartender. I said something to her and then turned around to go somewhere else and promptly ran into her, as she was cleaning on the floor. The last things I experienced happened on that same night. I was cleaning the washrooms after we closed, and when I was wiping down the counters, I heard the sound of something heavy slam against the wall behind me, and then slowly slide down. When I turned around, nothing was there, and that was the wall that didn't lie against any other rooms. I was really freaked out, so I finished up cleaning and went back to the bar area, and the bartender asked me to lock the front door. There's a little enclosed alcove that you have to stand in to lock the door, so no one can see you while you're doing it. The second I finished locking, and had turned around from the front door when something slammed right into the door, incredibly hard 3 times, rattling it like crazy. Other employees have seen weirder stuff, but this is the only thing I ever experienced.
Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP, phone, VoIP, and long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in the business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side, so didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customer would call in and say that DT1 lines were down or outages. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I can do anything my male counterparts could. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday to Saturday from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m. with an hour lunch, and then after 6 p.m. I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, schoolwork, and writing during this time. But sometimes, I would just wander the building, walk all around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone, so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda and go get food and so on. One time, I was up away from my desk. I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and 1 set of security doors. Same for the main entrance, only there was 1 camera facing that door. Nothing else really to make you feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much, because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason, they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never sure really why that was, but it didn't help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times, I would feel like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when getting a soda or snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So one night, I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night and needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough to get in and out quickly. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m, and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking the feelings off and briskly walked over to the soda machine to make my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there, but as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went to the stairs and ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place. Then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just a noise. I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over in my head, it was nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere, I got that feeling of someone watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside of the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflection of the lights inside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I have ever seen at the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There is no good reason why he's checking out my office. As I sit in my chair, I hear the doors shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the doors. They didn't budge to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes locked onto mine, he started to bang harder and smacked the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass doors to the next. 911, what's your emergency? The lady's voice was direct. Yeah, my name is such and such and I work at such and such. I need someone to come out. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I didn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. Out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came flying and smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what just happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against the glass door. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was now. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over the wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have the police hurry. She said they were on their way. I've read many of these stories, and when people say the cops couldn't get there fast enough, they aren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do nothing. Another smash against the door, but along with the glass breaking sound, sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for all her support. I stood back up, looked over the cubicle wall, and the red and blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was laying on the inside of the entryway. One officer came to the front door, and the others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come in the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw happen. Soon, my boss arrived and checked on me, then the damage. At some point, my husband was called and told I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off and started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with an ex-co-worker who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling, not under lock and key, but under a desk of the provisioner, from smartphones to Blackberries, when they were still worth buying, plus VoIP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds that were worth something. So, dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again.
Before my dad became a state police officer, he did some security work at a big factory. He's not normally a superstitious person, but when he told me this with such a weird seriousness to it, it kind of scared me. He's always said, "I don't mess with that stuff," regarding supernatural things. His story was in the early 80s. With working at the factory, he always had the night shift. It was just him, and the factory was big. He had his own little room where he could sit and watch TV, or the radio, relax, or do whatever. Well, the rest of the factory, for the most part besides the exits, were dark, and his job was actually to put the petrol in the factory every hour. He'd grab up his flashlight and just stroll around the place, going down row by row, peeking his head out left and right. One night he set to do his usual run with a flashlight in hand, but he couldn't see that something was unusual to his eye. And when he walked out of the dark, you know the sensation you get when your eyes adjust to the room and you can just make out certain things better? There was something darker in the main hall now, and it was moving. He paused for a minute, and as his eyes fully adjusted, there seemed to be nothing. He took a second swipe with the factory and his light, and then decided that the thing was not worth seeing. He went down to the main row and started his run. Everything was normal, nothing out of the ordinary, although he was a bit on edge, seeing as the factory without big movements and shadows was creepy enough. When the rows of the factory ended, there was a big open area at this end. There was the entrance of a factory. Normally, there would be a dim light at the front, but tonight it had dimmed lower. He thought it was weird and really began to sweat. So instead of investigating any further, he turned from the exit and went back to the main row and got back up to his room. That's when out of the corner of his eye, he saw what he could only describe as a black, cloaked figure. His light hit it and he saw it, tall and distinctly human-like, but nonetheless a figure. He just went right back to his own room. He left the factory and called the owner to tell him he wouldn't be returning, and I don't blame him.
During my time at university, I had a part-time job at a huge Bavarian company. The building had 8 floors and a quadratic shape with a big lobby hall in the center of the building. It actually was hundreds of years old, but completely renovated. I worked once or twice a week, mainly on weekends. Now, here's the interesting part. I worked in night shifts, and my job was basically to walk around the whole building twice a night. While walking through the hallways, I just had to watch out for stuff people forget when they rush into the weekend. Open doors, open windows, or light switches still turned on. Nothing out of the ordinary. The payment was also good. In fact, I was kind of surprised about how good the payment was, because obviously, I didn't have to do much in those 8 hours. My girlfriend and other friends mentioned that the payment is just fair, as I had to walk around a huge building at night, completely alone. Sometimes, my girlfriend visited me there to bring me a meal. They always mentioned how they would never do this, as the sinister feeling in buildings like these would play mind games with them. I never had problems with being alone, and I wasn't paranoid or believed in paranormal occurrences. I just studied throughout the night and did my 2 walks until this one night in September 2018. The shift started like any other. Got the keys from the janitor and started studying. After my first walk through the building, between 3:55 and 4:05 a.m., the whole electronic system throughout the building resets, which I found really odd at my first shift, but grew to ignore it after some months. The janitor explained the reason after I asked. The reset leads to light sources turning on and off throughout the whole building, systematically, but still chaotic. I sat at the front desk, not even paying attention to it, when suddenly, a certain noise reached me. One of the 2 elevator doors in the first floor opened itself, closed itself, and opened itself again. A malfunction, I thought, going back to reading boring scientific papers. After 20 minutes, it happened again, but this time, the light in the elevator switched off, which seemed really off. At this point, I started to feel a little bit alarmed. When I moved into the elevator, the door behind me closed. I panicked and tried to get out of the elevator, but it even started and took me to the 2nd floor in complete darkness. When I reached the 2nd floor, the door opened and I basically fell out of the elevator door, turning around while I fell. The really sinister looking, completely dark elevator closed again and took off to another floor. My heart was racing, and a part of me thought that someone manipulated the console, but another part of me felt something else. Fear. I had goosebumps all over my body and returned to the front desk with the plan to text my supervisor and the janitor about a technical defect of the elevator. I did this with trembling hands when I suddenly heard another distant noise, radio music from somewhere in the canteen. I slowly moved to the canteen with my smartphone light switched on. The noise came from the kitchen and I followed it. Reaching the kitchen, I saw that the radio was playing music on some of the tables. The cooks listened to the radio while working. I froze and couldn't breathe. During my first walk, the janitor texted me and told me to put the radio under a certain desk and switch it off, as the cooks would always store it there. I did this directly when I started the shift, even texting him, because I couldn't find the desk at first after unplugging the radio. I turned around and sprinted through the canteen, directly to an exit, and waited outside for the last 2 hours. Luckily, I had the keys with me when someone from the day shift came. When he arrived, I got into the building with him, took my bag, and left quickly. I called myself in sick for the next 2 weeks. After that, I quit the job using excuses regarding my sleep cycle. To this day, I don't know what happened that night.
One summer, I was running a poker league in the recreation center of a retirement complex. The property was built on land where my friend's grandfather used to have a flowery nursery many years ago. Despite it being brand new, it was a seriously creepy building. My skin would just crawl just being there. Lights would flicker, it was cold all the time, and it wasn't comfortable. You could just feel something was there. One night, after the players had left, I was hurried cleaning up, so I couldn't get out of there as fast as I would have liked to. I was ready to go, and was halfway to the door when I realized I'd forgotten my keys, and was heading back out when someone cleared their throat in my ear. It sounded like a man. It was deep and directly in my left ear, unmistakable. I bolted, left the doors unlocked, lights on, jumped in my car and drove home to get to my boyfriend at the time. He came back with me and checked the place out and there was no one there. Months later, I caught up with a friend whose grandfather had owned the nursery. I told her the story of the night and how scared I was. She looked at me like I was pulling her leg and proceeded to tell me that when her grandfather had passed away, her aunt had come home for the funeral. She insisted on sleeping in his bed for the night, and when she woke up the next morning, she told her family how she had heard her father clearing his throat throughout the whole night.
I work as security for a hospital in Texas. This hospital has seen its fair share of deaths and freaks. We've had more than enough tragic, near-miss, and absolutely preventable deaths. We get at least one meth addict talking about demons every single week. I started working as a man who seriously wasn't into the paranormal scene. I knew that some things couldn't be explained, but that 99.999% could. To this day, I still look for those explanations before deciding something is spooky. I'm throwing this out there because the spooky stuff is very much escalating in both frequency and in degree. I don't want to think that someone's going to actually be affected by these things, but I'm really not a fan. I'm going to give a quick list of reported spooky areas, the events in them, and the general time period before I get to what made me write this. It's all within 2 years, so it's not long. Primarily, the areas are closed and empty. In one of our 3 towers, the ER, and our new office, primarily, but not exclusively. The first 6 weeks, in the ER, non-auto doors opening on their own to let people through, bathrooms that lock themselves with deadbolts. They can't lock and close, and they're too stiff to just trigger because you close it hard. In the closed unit, all sorts of noises and movement, the odd groan, moan or whimper, and general sense of being watched. I ran into something that looked like a staff member I had never seen before or since, staring dead into his little rolling trash can, completely motionless, expressionless, dead fish-like. When the fragment of a thought to look into his trash can rose, I felt every single fiber of my body slam my mind with a heavy "don't." Never felt that before or since, and I've faced knives, potential shooters, and built men on PCP, completely unarmed and alone. In the hallways, secondary footsteps when I'm walking alone down a hallway. Different gear doesn't affect it, nor is it recreated in similar or seemingly the same circumstances. For the next year, I've mostly dealt with the same type of things as in the first 6 weeks, minus Trash Can Boy. Seemed like a pretty steady frequency as well. In a closed unit, since it was built into a unit but still unused, I saw a female in scrubs enter a room of the far side of the west hallway, check every single room, closet and bathroom, find nothing. I see the same woman perform the same movements on the opposite end of the east hallway. Another time, rounding with the other officer, and clearly seeing bare, Caucasian feet peeking from a shower. I quickly pull the shower curtain and find nobody. While walking with a different officer, I turn the corner and check behind me and see an older Caucasian female in the act of crawling towards me, with right hand reaching for my left ankle, about 6 inches from contact, gone when I turn around. In the new office, I often hear deliberate, people-like sounds from the empty half, mostly dropping things that aren't on the ground, and clear knocking. I heard a non-existent metallic object drop between 2 officers on the open side. I saw a reflection of a nurse walk across a window in such a way that would put her on our side and through a wall. I've had missing keys that appear in a 5-time checked location while I was the only one there. Yesterday, our new office was empty for 2 to 3 minutes. Hardly anyone has access, and those who do, hardly any of them have access to our director's office. When I returned, I walked through the closed side as usual. Our broom was leaning against the door and smacked my hip when I opened the door, and our director's door was wide open. The only other officer was visible on cameras somewhere else, and our director was preoccupied somewhere else. Audible noises were very active the rest of the day. Today, I had an unsettling feeling the 3 hours I was in there. I found a small trash can by me that moved a solid foot while I was alone. That haunted door opened itself twice when I made sure it was closed each time. When I left to go somewhere more populated, I heard frantic running right behind me as soon as I opened the door. I closed it immediately out of surprise, but saw nobody from the door window, which can see everywhere one would walk. To be clear, I had an instinctive reaction to jump and use the door as a shield before I even really knew that I was moving. This has been escalating like nuts within the last couple of months, but I'm not sure why. Since before I was hired, multiple officers and even medical staff have had unique and shared experiences, some different from my own. The 2 other supervisors saw the same shadow person, but never knew until I told them that the other one saw the same thing. Some updates. November 4, 21. I was just walking behind a doctor in a hallway. We hit an intersection with another hallway. There are no doors in the immediate area around the intersection. Despite this, he somehow disappeared within the 4 seconds that it took me before I turned the same corner. I didn't hear any heavy footfalls that had implied running, and there are no doors he would have reached by then, particularly in that hallway, as the only doors would be a good 12 seconds or so going at this place. I thought I was walking behind a doctor, but now I'm not so sure. November 18, 21. In our security office, I heard some footsteps in the back, where we keep the door closed from. On night shift, there's not usually a reason for being back there, so I opened the door. Nobody, and the footsteps stopped. I closed the door and went to walk away, but heard the footsteps again. I could hear the footsteps go back and forth down the short hallway. When I listened harder, I could even hear the heel or flat sound of casual walking. I threw the door open this time when the steps came up to the door, and there was nobody there. I said out loud, "Hey, stop being so loud when I'm the only one here," and left the office to do a round around the hospital. No footsteps when I returned with another officer. I'm a somewhat nihilistic person with no real fear of anything that's actually threatening, except that death is coming from shooters, meth addicts with knives, and the ghost. Scared of heights, the ocean, and space. I know, I'm ass backwards and dumb. Being such, I didn't spare a thought the first time I was having a frustrating day at work and hearing constant noise from the then locked haunted side, telling it something along the lines of, "Yo, can you just chill for now? You can act up whenever things calm down for all I care." To my surprise, the activity dropped almost immediately and didn't act up again until the next couple of days. I've pulled that maneuver 2 other times, or 3 including today, in similar circumstances. I try not to pull that too often, mostly because I want the seeming respect of my frustration to stay strong. I've even told my partner supervisor that if he's in a similar situation, he could try to pull the same thing. I don't think he has, but still. I also try to keep my tone strong, but not aggressive, and to not outright deny the entity of acting up. I always add that it can act up under different circumstances, rather than just telling the thing that I don't understand to stop in general until the end of time. November 20th, 21. During pass down with the supervisor I relieve, I heard footsteps coming from the haunted section of our office. I checked it with him and found nothing, but the noises stopped. As soon as we get close to the door again, the footsteps began again and have continued. He also told me that earlier in the shift, he was hearing so many sounds next door that he assumed multiple people were in. While he was writing reports, he expected someone from the cleaning crew to come in, but they never did. So he checked the next door area and found absolutely nobody. There was so much noise that he thought that there were multiple individuals in there. Apparently no voices though, but all that stopped when he opened the door. February 18, 22. My partner supervisor and his officer were walking through one of the units on one of our towers. This unit was empty at the time. As they walked past one of the nurses' stations, one of the chairs rolled into the pathway of the other side of it. February 24, 22. My partner supervisor and his officer told me about their experience when rounding in a unit that is currently empty. Due to lack of staff, we filled the old abandoned unit by basically shutting down a couple others. They told me that they heard the sound of something heavy being dragged on the floor above them. This would be understandable given that there are 2 doors above that one, except for the fact that all noise is kept to each unit. We've had full running, shouting, ground fights, and so on these floors, and nothing penetrates the floors. There are things in between the floors that make noise, mostly pipes and tubes, but nothing can be described as dragging something heavy. February 26, 22. I got a call to unlock a bathroom on one of our towers. The woman's restroom on every floor of one of our towers has a habit of locking itself. They're all a deadbolt that requires a decent amount of force, and they resist slamming. We tried. We've even stalked the cameras to see if someone did it, but have seen multiple times that people will leave the bathroom normally. Someone will come and try the door, and the next people entering will be security with a key. So my partner supervisor and I recognized that this was for one of these bathrooms. We bring our skeptic officer with us and go to unlock one of these doors. We knock and call to anybody inside before trying the handle, and finding it locked, we open it with the keys and find nobody inside. The skeptic can't find a good reason for it, and especially considering it's only ever been the women's restrooms, 5 in total, that have the same rough location per floor of a single tower. No other restroom does this, and no other tower has this issue. February 27, 22. Small event, but I still can't figure it out. I was alone in our office and began to leave to do a round. As I was maybe 3 steps from the door, I heard the distinct sound of a person knocking. Not wood being knocked on, but someone knocking one of those little tunes that people do. It took me less than 4 seconds to open the door, but nobody was there. In that time, someone would have had to sprint to get out of eyesight, and that's only in one direction. When I asked a nearby staff member that was dealing with visitors if they saw someone move from our direction, she said no. I had already been hearing quite a bit of extra noises in the spooky side of our office, but had been actively pretending to not notice until then. Needless to say, I felt uncomfortable knowing that I had just walked through a haunt or something. I'm an Italian 24-year-old male, and I'm skeptical and don't believe in ghosts despite a series of unexplained events, most during night shift, which terrorized my colleagues while I tried my best to investigate them to no avail. This is a recount of the phenomena I encountered while working at this old abandoned medieval village turned hotel, where everyone died there to the plague in 1300. It started with a Russian woman on holiday with her husband. As I was leading her to her room, she stopped in front of the door, asking me if something bad happened there, because she felt, quote, a bad energy. I brushed it off, and when going back to the front desk, cracked a joke to my colleagues. They told me the owner hanged himself in that room. The private church bell rang 3 times by itself. It's a small medieval church with nothing electric, and I had the key to the only door. My other female co-workers didn't want to go investigate, but I didn't want a guest breaking into the place or something, so I went to check. The door was still locked, as was the door to the bell. As I opened it, the rope was swinging as if it was pulled up until that moment. A night shift co-worker never went down to the kitchen to eat ever again after he came running back upstairs, but he never told me what happened. As I was having a meal, multiple weird events over following nights happened, including one table blanket slowly flapping around as if it moved by wind, despite no windows or ACs, and other tables being perfectly still. Chairs moving upstairs and making a lot of noise. When I confronted my supervisor about it, he said he never moved from what was also the only chair in the back office. I used to have an overwhelming feeling of someone looking at me while I was eating. I start looking around the room just to find a door curtain immediately swing closed. I rushed to open it and found nothing outside. Odd thing was, it was atop a big flight of stairs, so nothing could have possibly gotten away that quickly. I asked my coworker if he was pranking me and said that he never moved from the office. I heard my name distinctly called from upstairs. I was annoyed at the interruption, and when going upstairs, the other guy said he'd never called me, nor heard any voices. One night, I was passing by the old village well. I don't know why, but I had the urge to look down into it. As I did, I noticed something swimming away in a flash and submerging. Another time, I was staying until bar closure one night when the barista girl asked me to accompany her to pick up the following morning's supplies in an adjacent villa. As I lead the way, she started mentioning a ghost being there and not liking her, and I started noticing the kind of decorations on the walls. Victorian portraits of dogmen, like nobles but with dog faces, and scary porcelain horse busts. After a while, I get to the depot, but the girl behind me is gone. I backtrack looking for her, and after a while, I find her in the dark at the start of a hallway. I very cautiously approach her, and she just points her finger down the hallway, asking me if I saw them too. I stared hard into the dark hallway, but saw nothing. Still, that was when I decided to haul ass. I picked the girl up over my shoulder and ran outside. These are just the most glaring things, but am I being blindly stubborn at denying or downplaying what's happening in front of my face, despite others not wanting to work there or go to places at night?
Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Deadly Cure for narrating all these night shift stories with me. It's been an absolute pleasure and a blast. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed Deadly Cure's voice, feel free to check out his channel, a link on screen now and in the description. It would definitely mean a lot. And a huge thanks as always to my Ko-fi, Patreon and members. You guys are the best. Thank you. But the link is now on screen, so I recommend you check it out. Thank you so much. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.